By the mid-2000s, Sweden's In Flames had become one of the biggest metal bands on the planet, having gone through multiple lineup and stylistic changes. But there was one constant throughout all of their albums from their 1994 debut, Lunar Strain, up to 2008's A Sense of Purpose. And that was the signature melodic death metal riffs of founding guitarist Jesper Stromblad. But after Stromblad's departure from the band in 2010, In Flames continued on an even more experimental path, while Stromblad continued playing in various projects, including The Resistance and Syra. And then, in 2019, Stromblad and other former members of In Flames, including Dark Tranquillity vocalist Michael Stane, began forming what would be announced in 2021 as a Gothenburg metal supergroup, the Halo Effect. And the new group's formation was almost immediately labeled as a challenge to In Flames by showcasing the band's roots and celebrating the original Gothenburg melodic death metal sound, with Stromblad producing some of his signature riffs. Since 2021, the band has been successful, and in the meantime, In Flames made a bit of a melodic death metal comeback with their critically acclaimed 2023 album Foregone. And some people speculated that In Flames' return to some of their former heaviness was a direct result of competition with the Halo Effect. And so the question became, how much of the Halo Effect's formation had anything to do with challenging In Flames? And how much did the Halo Effect influence In Flames' own return to some of the melodic death metal elements it had been moving away from since Stromblad's departure? Hey everybody, I'm Joe Meyer and this is Heavy Academia, a platform for heavy music discussions. And in this video, I want to discuss the hype about a supposed rivalry between In Flames and the Halo Effect, and see how this might have overshadowed some more important aspects of each band's 2020s releases, like, for example, celebrating 3 decades of Gothenburg melodic death metal. Now, the Halo Effect announced its formation to the metal world in 2021, and the band's earliest releases demonstrated a clear throwback to that old Gothenburg sound. And with the combination of former In Flames members playing a style that was, in some ways, reminiscent of Stromblad's own work with In Flames, different media outlets immediately painted the Halo Effect's formation as the result of a rivalry with In Flames. However, members of the Halo Effect quickly dispelled any rumors by arguing that there was no rivalry involved. Bassist Peter Evers, who played in Flames from Colony up to Battles, said in an interview that, "It's really simple in my world, but I understand how people think that and how some people would like to think that. But there's no rivalry. In Flames, I was a member for 20 years, and it is what it is. It's a great band, and they always will be." Members of In Flames also tried to quiet any suggestions that the two bands had anything to do with each other, with frontman Anders Frieden saying that there have been former members of In Flames that played in other bands. Why would this be any different? I think media want it to be something, adding that they're allowed to make music. And longtime In Flames guitarist Bjorn Gelot hinted that all the members of both bands had respect for each other, stating that these are extremely good musicians, all of them, and they all have been part of In Flames as members, and they, for different reasons, chose not to tour or be a part of this anymore. They are really good. The music, I haven't really heard that much, but I know what they're all capable of. So this is obviously not going to be bad in any way. And so the band members of both In Flames and the Halo Effect tried to quell any rumors about a rivalry early on, while also trying to play down comparisons between the two bands. However, there were some reasons for fans and observers to think that there might have been bad blood between them. Around the same time that the Halo Effect formed and released their first album, Days of the Lost, In Flames began working on the release of Foregone, which was framed as a return to form, with several singles released that seemed to show the band returning to their earlier sound and moving away from the alternative metal that they had been experimenting with since Stromblad left the band. And Anders Frieden said that, "Me and Bjorn talked about how we were missing that guitar attack. The driving force of In Flames is the mix between melody and aggression, and we've been lacking that for a little bit." And for some people, this seemed to serve as proof that the Halo Effect rivalry had pushed In Flames to try and reclaim their place in the Gothenburg extreme metal scene. Also, things weren't always so amicable between In Flames and some of their former members. For example, founding guitarist Jesper Strömblad criticized In Flames after his departure from the band, especially their second release after he left, Battles, saying in 2017 that, "To be honest, I think they should actually change the name, because it's such a huge difference from the beginning. But if that's the way they want to do it, fine." Also adding that the band's soul was lost after he left. However, Jesper would go on to take a more conciliatory approach, saying that they're still doing great. They're an institution. They still play to huge crowds at festivals and are doing a good job and have great musicians with them. Plus, In Flames and Michael Stane didn't seem to have any pre-existing drama, with In Flames putting Stane's other band, Dark Tranquillity, on the bill for their Borgholm Brynner Festival in 2018 and the Gothenburg Brynner Festival in 2026. Either way, it's up to you to decide if the members of the Halo Effect and In Flames were being sincere in saying that there was no conflict or rivalry between the two bands. But as someone who really likes both bands and tries to stay objective while doing research, I really think that what got looked over in the formation of the Halo Effect and the release of Foregone is a celebration of the legacy of 30 years of melodic death metal out of Gothenburg. And I think it's a bit of a shame that the quest for finding drama led so many media outlets to overlook this pretty significant aspect. In my opinion, I think that the Halo Effect is a perfect reflection of Gothenburg melodic death metal's humble beginnings and what it has grown into over the years. And that's mainly because the band seems to be a manifestation of not only the sound, but also the community that created Gothenburg's melodic death metal scene. Now, In Flames was formed in 1990, the same year as fellow melodic death metal pioneering bands Dark Tranquillity and At the Gates, who are also from the Gothenburg region. And Gothenburg is Sweden's second largest city, with just over 1 million people in its larger metropolitan area. Sitting on the country's west coast, it was historically a port town with lots of maritime trade and international influences. It also became a heavily industrial city and is the home base of Volvo, which began operating there in 1927. And it was in a small suburb of this working-class industrial city that members of In Flames, Dark Tranquillity, At the Gates, among others, came into contact, often partying together and sharing music. So the question of whether the Halo Effect and In Flames had some kind of rivalry is kind of pointless in my opinion, since there was a lot of contact between members of the bands since the early days, even swapping members on some occasions. For example, Anders Frieden played drums and then later vocals for Dark Tranquillity before joining In Flames, while Michael Stane sang for In Flames and then later joined Dark Tranquillity. According to Stane, in the early days he would take the public bus to the city. He would get on the first stop, and then Dark Tranquillity guitarist Niklas Sundin and In Flames vocalist Anders Frieden would hop on, followed by At the Gates founders Anders and Jonas Björler, and then Anders and Peter Evers would join them. He then goes on to say that we'd sit in the park with a tape recorder and tons of beer, and that was it. The community and the friendships started there. And so the Halo Effect, rather than being the result of a rivalry, was actually born out of a long-standing sense of community that survived decades of each of the bands going on to find their own levels of success, lineup changes, and musical experimentation. But the Halo Effect was often labeled as a supergroup featuring former In Flames members. And when the band's formation was announced, the point that it was made up of musicians who had each played in Flames at some point was what took the spotlight and made the headlines. And while each of the members had at one time or another been in Flames, Jesper Strömblad was the only one who had been in the original In Flames lineup as its founder. The other members of the Halo Effect, while they had all been in Flames, also participated in several other bands as well. For example, the Halo Effect drummer Daniel Svensson had been with In Flames since the release of Colony up to Siren Charms, leaving the band to focus more on being with his family. But he had also played in melodic death metal band Sacrilege. And the Halo Effect guitarist Niklas Engelin joined In Flames briefly after the release of Horacle, and then jumped in again in the 2010s after Strömblad's departure. And he featured on Sounds of a Playground Fading, Battles, and I the Mask. But he had also played in melodeath band Gardenian, as well as Anders Frieden's alternative metal side project Passenger in the early 2000s. And Peter Evers also played in Syro with Jesper. While as we know, Michael Stane is mostly known as the frontman of Dark Tranquillity, and was only in Flames for a short time in the band's early years. So the point of all of these details is that, yes, all of the Halo Effect's members were at one point or another also members of In Flames, but some of them much longer than others, and they were all also members of multiple other bands. And so the halo effect was really just a product of all of these bands' long tradition of basically sharing band members. And I really wish that they would have been painted more as a band featuring legends of the Gothenburg scene rather than just an In Flames spin-off, which seems to have been an attempt to try and fuel the hype of a beef between the two bands. And to elaborate on this point, due to the focus surrounding each band member's time with In Flames, a lot of fans, including myself, were led to expect something that sounded like In Flames' earlier records when Days of the Lost was released in 2022. Instead, fans were surprised to find that the album didn't sound as much like Lunar Strain or The Jester Race as they had expected, with multiple people deciding that the halo effect actually sounded more like Dark Tranquillity than In Flames, and with some even going as far as claiming that the halo effect was little more than Dark Tranquillity 2.0.
From what I heard, I haven't listened. From what I hear, it sounds more like Dark Tranquillity than In Flames. So
yeah, it has very like schoolish vibe.
Yeah.
However, I believe that if listeners can put aside the hype of the band's links to In Flames, they can appreciate the halo effect for what it really is, which is a demonstration of each individual member's own unique styles. And what I mean by that is, with the halo effect, we don't get either In Flames or Dark Tranquillity. Instead, we get classic Michael Stana on vocals, classic Jesper Stromblad and Niklas Englund on guitars, classic Peter Evers on bass, and classic Svensson on drums. And the members of the halo effect themselves seem to agree with this, claiming that the band's style is almost a natural outcome of the members' own backgrounds. For instance, Daniel Svensson said that when it comes to the halo effect sound, of course it sounds a little Gothenburg metalish, because we are all from that genre and we are some of the people that kind of created it. So of course it will sound Gothenburg metalish, In Flames-ish. This is how we sound today, and with our legacy this is inevitable, that we sound as we do. And while there's no real rivalry and the bands have gone in their own directions, there are still deeper connections that fans of Gothenburg melodic death metal in general can appreciate. As Michael Stana put it, we are kind of forever linked, just because of our connection early on. I sang on the first In Flames album, and Anders sang on the first Dark Tranquillity album, and this is still a cause of great confusion for some reason. But yeah, we toured together, we are friends, and we grew up together in the same area outside of town. And so, rather than listening to the halo effect to find echoes of early In Flames, or listening to Foregone as a response to the halo effect, I think it's best to view this all as the legacy of a bunch of friends in a small part of Gothenburg who grew up together, drinking beer, sharing tapes, and jamming together. So let us know what you think. What is the legacy of Gothenburg's 1990s melodic death metal movement today? And where do you place In Flames and the halo effect, among others, in that legacy? Thanks for watching, and see you again soon here on Heavy Academia.